The sun bore down mercilessly on the endless grassland, turning the earth to dust and the horizon to a shimmering line of heat. Martha Caldwell stood on the porch of her weathered cabin, one hand shading her eyes as she counted the cattle grazing in the distance. 37 head, all that remained of what had once been a promising herd of 50. The drought had taken some. Wolves had claimed others. But the cattle endured, just as she did. The wind whipped her faded calico dress against her legs, carrying with it the scent of sage and dried grass. She was 32 years old, though the mirror inside told her she looked older. 5 years of solitude had etched lines around her eyes, and the harsh prairie sun had darkened her once fair skin to the color of tanned leather. Her hands, once soft enough to embroider delicate patterns on Sunday handkerchiefs, were now rough and calloused from mending fences and hauling water. Thomas had been gone for 4 years now. He'd left on a Tuesday morning, claiming he needed supplies from Fort Stockton. She'd packed him biscuits wrapped in cloth, kissed his stubbled cheek, and watched him ride away on their best horse. He never came back. At first, she'd waited by the window each evening, certain she'd see his familiar silhouette against the sunset. Then came the letter from a friend in San Antonio. Thomas had been seen there with a younger woman, boarding a stage bound for California. The abandonment had stung, but it wasn't the sharpest pain she carried. No, that particular ache lived deeper, in a place no amount of hard work could reach. It was the emptiness in her womb, the children who had never come despite years of trying. She'd lost 3 before they quickened, each loss marked by blood and tears and Thomas's increasing distance. The local doctor, a gruff man who smelled of whiskey, had told her bluntly that some women simply weren't meant for motherhood. Thomas had looked at her differently after that, as if she were a field that couldn't yield crops no matter how carefully tended. Martha walked among her cattle now, running her hand along the flank of Bessie, her led cow. The animal was heavy with calf, her sides swollen with promise. It seemed every creature on this land could multiply except her. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. She could nurture these beasts, help them birth their young, raise the calves to be strong and healthy, but her own body remained stubbornly barren. The other ranchers thought her peculiar, a woman alone trying to run cattle. Jim Morrison from the neighboring ranch had offered to buy her out twice, each time for less than the land was worth. "A woman's got no business out here alone," he'd said, tobacco juice staining his beard. "This land'll eat you alive. Martha, take my offer and go back east where you belong." But she had nowhere to go back to. Her parents were dead, claimed by cholera 3 summers past. Her sister had married a shopkeeper in Philadelphia and made it clear in her letters that a barren, abandoned woman would find no welcome in their respectable home. This patch of dusty earth, these stubborn cattle, the creaking cabin with its memories. This was all she had. As evening approached, Martha performed her nightly ritual. She checked the gate latches, ensuring they were secure against predators. She pumped fresh water into the trough, watching the cattle amble over for their evening drink. The calves stayed close to their mothers, and she found herself staring at them with a mixture of tenderness and envy. One of the younger cows, a first-time mother, licked her calf's face with patient devotion. Martha's throat tightened. Inside the cabin, she prepared her simple meal, beans and cornbread, the same as most nights. The silence pressed against her ears as she ate. Sometimes she talked to herself just to hear a human voice. Other times, like tonight, the quiet felt appropriate, almost sacred. She cleaned her dishes in the basin, dried them carefully, and placed them back on the shelf Thomas had built during their first year here. Despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to hate him. He'd wanted children too, perhaps even more than she had. When it became clear she couldn't give them to him, was it any wonder he'd sought greener pastures? Before bed, Martha allowed herself one small ritual of hope. In the drawer of her dresser, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a tiny christening gown she'd sewn during her first pregnancy. The delicate stitches had taken her weeks to complete, each one placed with dreams of the child who would wear it. She held it up to the lamplight, admiring the small pearl buttons. the carefully embroidered flowers along the hem. Her hands trembled as she folded it again, placing it back in its tissue paper shroud. Outside, a coyote howled, and the cattle stirred restlessly. Martha blew out the lamp and lay in her narrow bed, one hand resting on her flat stomach. In the darkness, she could almost pretend things were different. She could imagine the weight of a child there, feel phantom kicks beneath her palm. But morning always came, bringing with it the harsh light of reality. The land was teaching her its lessons, that survival meant accepting what couldn't be changed while fighting for what could. She'd learned to doctor sick cattle, to predict weather by the color of the sunset, to stretch supplies through lean months. But the deepest lesson was also the cruelest, that a woman could possess land, cattle, independence, and still feel as empty as the desert wind, as sleep finally claimed her. Martha's last thought was a prayer she'd stopped believing would be answered. Not for her husband's return. That dream had died long ago. Not for wealth or ease. She'd grown too practical for such wishes. Her prayer was simpler and more impossible, for the chance to hold a child of her own, to pour all her stored-up love into a small life that would call her mother, in her dreams. She could hear that voice, sweet and clear as spring water. But dreams, like everything else in this hard country, had a way of turning to dust by morning. The August night hung heavy and still, without even a whisper of wind to stir the cottonwoods by the creek. Martha lay awake, her thin nightgown clinging to her skin in the oppressive heat. Through the open window, she could hear the cattle shifting restlessly, their occasional lowing carrying across the darkness. Sleep eluded her. It often did on nights like this when the air felt charged with something she couldn't name. Then she heard it, a splash from the direction of the creek, too loud to be any of her cattle. They rarely ventured to the water at night, preferring the safety of the open pasture. Martha sat up, listening intently. Another splash, followed by what sounded like a groan, distinctly human. Her first instinct was to bar the door and wait for morning. A woman alone had to be careful, especially with drifters and outlaws using the creek trails. But something in that sound, a note of genuine distress, made her reach for Thomas's old rifle instead. She pulled on her boots and wrapped a shawl over her nightgown, then slipped out the back door. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver and shadow. Martha moved carefully, the rifle heavy in her hands. Following the creek bank, the splashing had stopped, replaced by labored breathing. As she rounded a cluster of willows, she saw him. He was collapsed half in the water, half on the muddy bank. Even in the moonlight, she could see the dark stain spreading across his shirt. Blood, and plenty of it. His hair was long and black, his skin darker than any of the ranch hands who sometimes passed through. An Apache. Martha's finger found the trigger. Everyone knew what the Apache did to white women. The stories were told and retold at every gathering, each more horrific than the last. Sarah Mackenzie, taken from her garden. The Paulson sisters. Found? Martha shook her head, pushing away the images, but the man hadn't moved except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. If he was a threat, he was in no condition to act on it. She stood frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The Christian thing would be to help him. The sensible thing would be to let nature take its course. But as she watched, he tried to pull himself further onto the bank and failed, sliding back toward the water with a sound that was unmistakably a sob of frustration. "Lord, forgive me," Martha whispered, lowering the rifle. She approached slowly, ready to retreat at any sign of aggression. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 30. The wound was in his side, a deep gash that looked like a knife or bayonet had caught him. His eyes fluttered open as her shadow fell across him, and she found herself looking into eyes dark as the night sky, filled with pain and something else. Resignation, perhaps. He said something in his own language, voice barely above a whisper. Martha didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear enough. He expected death, maybe even welcomed it. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, knowing he probably didn't understand her any more than she understood him. She set the rifle aside, just out of his reach, and knelt beside him. The wound was bad, but not fatal if treated properly. She'd doctored enough injured cattle to know that much. The question was what to do with him. Bringing an Apache to the house would be madness. If anyone found out, if Jim Morrison or any of the other ranchers discovered she was harboring one of their enemies, she'd be run out of the county at best, at worst. She didn't want to think about that. But the barn, the old cattle barn, was far enough from the road that no one would think to look there, and close enough to the house that she could tend to him. If he lived through the night, if he didn't try to kill her first. Martha made her decision. "Can you stand? We need to get you out of sight." He looked at her uncomprehendingly. So she gestured, miming standing and walking. Understanding flickered in his eyes, and he tried to push himself up. Martha slipped her arm under his, taking as much of his weight as she could. He was taller than she'd expected, lean but solid with muscle. Together, they managed a stumbling progress toward the barn. Every few steps, she expected him to turn on her, to produce a hidden weapon, but he seemed focused entirely on staying upright, his breathing harsh and ragged against her ear. When they finally reached the barn, he collapsed onto the hay-strewn floor with a groan. Martha lit a lantern, keeping it low, and examined the wound more closely. Definitely a blade of some kind, and recent, within the last few hours. He'd lost a lot of blood. She'd need clean water, bandages, and the bottle of whiskey she kept for medicinal purposes. "Stay here," she said, making a gesture she hoped he'd understand. "I'll be back." In the house, she gathered what she needed, her mind racing. What was she doing? This went against every piece of advice she'd ever been given about surviving alone on the frontier. But something about the way he'd looked at her, that resignation to death, had stirred something she thought her barren years had killed, the instinct to nurture, to save rather than survive. When she returned, he hadn't moved. His eyes tracked her movements as she knelt beside him, alert despite the pain. Martha had doctored plenty of animals, but a man was different. She'd have to cut away his shirt to clean the wound properly. "This is going to hurt," she warned, pouring whiskey onto a clean cloth. He seemed to understand, nodding slightly and gritting his teeth. The first touch of alcohol to the wound made him arch off the ground, a strangled cry escaping his lips. Martha worked quickly, cleaning away the blood and dirt. The cut was deep but clean. No vital organs damaged as far as she could tell. She packed it with clean cloth and bound it tightly, her hands steady despite her nerves. Through it all, he watched her, not with the hatred she'd expected to see in an Apache's eyes, but with something like wonder. When she finished, he spoke again, a single word that sounded like "Tahe." "Is that your name?" she asked. "Tahe." He shook his head slightly, pointed to himself. "Tahan. Tahan." She tested the name, and he nodded. Then he pointed to her, eyebrows raised in question. "Martha," she said. He repeated it, the thin-th sound giving him trouble, so it came out more like Marta. Close enough. She left him water and some cornbread, showing him where she'd hidden more supplies behind the hay bales. Then she stood, uncertain. Should she tie him up, take precautions? But he could barely move, let alone pose a threat. "I'll check on you in the morning," she said. "Try to rest." As she walked back to the house, rifle in hand, Martha wondered what morning would bring. Would he be gone, vanished like smoke? Would he be dead, leaving her with a body to somehow dispose of? Or would he still be there, dark eyes watching her with that strange mix of pain and wonder? The sensible part of her, the part that had survived 5 years alone, screamed that she was making a terrible mistake. But another part, the part that had prayed for so long for someone to care for, whispered that perhaps God worked in mysterious ways. Perhaps this wounded stranger was not a threat, but a test, or even an answer to prayers she hadn't known she was praying. Back in her bed, Martha lay awake until dawn, every sound making her heart race. But the night passed peacefully, and when the first light crept across the prairie, She was still alive, still alone in her house. Whatever she'd set in motion by saving the Apache would have to play out in its own time. For now, she had cattle to tend and a wounded man hidden in her barn, a secret that could destroy her or, just maybe, save her from the crushing loneliness that threatened to turn her heart to prairie dust. Dawn came with its usual demands: cattle to water, fences to check, the endless cycle of ranch work that waited for no one. Martha moved through her morning chores mechanically, her thoughts continually drifting to the barn. Was he still alive? Had he fled in the night despite his injuries? Part of her almost hoped he had gone, taking with him the dangerous complication he represented. But a larger part, one that surprised her with its strength, hoped he remained. When she finally approached the barn with a basket of supplies, her heart hammered against her ribs. She paused at the door, listening. Silence. Then, as she pushed it open, she saw him. Tahan had managed to prop himself against the wall, his face gray with pain but his eyes alert. He watched her enter with that same steady gaze from the night before, not hostile, not grateful, simply observant. The bandages were soaked through with blood, but he was conscious, breathing, alive. "You stayed," she said unnecessarily, setting down the basket. He tilted his head slightly, not understanding the words, but perhaps catching her tone of surprise. Martha busied herself with the supplies, fresh bandages, more whiskey for cleaning, a pot of broth she'd heated at dawn. When she knelt beside him to change the dressing, he didn't flinch away. His stillness wasn't submission, she realized, but a kind of dignified endurance. He'd probably endured worse than this, probably seen suffering that would break most of the soft-handed townspeople who spoke so fearfully of the Apache. The wound looked better in daylight, angry and red, but no signs of infection yet. As she worked, she found herself talking, filling the silence with words he couldn't understand. "My husband used to say I talked too much," she said, carefully peeling away the blood-stained cloth. "Especially when I was nervous. Martha," he'd say, "the good Lord gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. But the silence out here, sometimes I think it might swallow me whole if I don't push back against it with words." Tahan made a sound, not quite a word, more of an acknowledgement that she was speaking. His eyes followed her movements as she cleaned the wound, and she noticed how he controlled his breathing, taking slow, measured breaths, despite what must be considerable pain. "You're different from what I expected," she continued, reaching for fresh bandages. "The stories they tell about your people. But then, I suppose you might say the same about us. What stories do the Apache tell about white women? I wonder, are we the monsters in your tales?" When she finished with the bandages, she sat back on her heels and studied him. In the morning light filtering through the barn slats, she could see him more clearly. His face was angular, weathered by sun and wind, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. There were other scars on his chest and arms, old ones, white against his bronze skin, a warrior's body, marked by battles she couldn't imagine. She offered him the broth, and he took the cup with steady hands. As he drank, she noticed how he held it, carefully, as if unused to such vessels. When he finished, he handed it back with a slight nod that might have been thanks. Days passed in this strange routine. Martha would tend her cattle, do her chores, all the while aware of the secret in her barn. She brought him food, changed his bandages, and gradually, without words, they developed a kind of understanding. He was healing well, too well to need constant care, but not well enough to travel. She should have been urging him to leave, should have been counting the days until this danger passed. Instead, she found herself looking forward to their quiet encounters, to the way his eyes would find hers when she entered the barn. On the 4th day, she found him standing, testing his strength. He froze when she entered, as if caught doing something forbidden. "It's all right," she said quickly. "You need to move. Keep the muscles from stiffening." He watched her set down the food, then surprised her by speaking. Marta. Her name, accented but clear. Then he touched his chest. "Tahan." He pointed to the door. made a walking motion with his fingers, then shook his head and pointed to her. It took her a moment to understand. "You're saying you should go, but you won't because of me, because I helped you?" He couldn't understand her words, but something in her tone must have conveyed her meaning. He nodded, then placed his hand over his heart and extended it toward her, a gesture so universal it needed no translation. Honor. He was speaking of honor. Martha felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time anyone had shown her such consideration? The townspeople who whispered about the poor abandoned woman, the neighboring ranchers who saw her only as an oddity or an opportunity. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly, but even as she spoke, she realized that wasn't what this was about. Somehow, in these few days, something had shifted between them. She no longer saw him as an Apache, that fearsome, faceless enemy. He was Tahan, a man who controlled his pain with dignity, who moved with a warrior's grace even when wounded, who looked at her without the pity or calculation she'd grown accustomed to seeing in men's eyes. That evening, instead of leaving immediately after tending his wound, Martha lingered. She'd brought a book, her Bible, worn and familiar, thinking perhaps to read while he rested. But as she opened it, Tahan made a questioning sound. She showed him the pages, the neat lines of text. His eyes lit with interest, and he pointed to the words, then to her, clearly asking what they were. "Words," she said, then had an idea. She smoothed a patch of dirt on the barn floor and used her finger to write. "Martha." "My name?" she said, pointing to herself, then to the letters. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He studied the letters intently, then carefully traced them himself in the dirt. His finger was steady, precise. Then he looked at her expectantly. She wrote Tahan next to her name. He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him, transforming his stern features into something almost boyish. He traced his name several times, as if memorizing the shapes. They spent an hour like that, Martha writing simple words and Tahan copying them with intense concentration. Barn, cattle, water, sun. When she wrote friend and pointed between them, he grew still. He traced the words slowly, then looked at her with those dark, penetrating eyes. "Friend," he said carefully, the word foreign on his tongue but clear in intent. "Yes," Martha whispered. "Friends." It was dangerous. This friendship every day increased the risk of discovery, but as Martha walked back to her house that night, she realized she hadn't felt this alive in years. Not since the early days with Thomas, before the disappointments and the distance. Tahan looked at her and saw not a barren woman or an abandoned wife, but simply Martha, someone worth knowing, worth honoring, worth calling friend. The moon rose full and bright, casting the prairie in silver. In the barn, Tahan practiced writing the words she'd taught him, his finger moving through the dirt with warrior's precision. And in her house, Martha lay awake not from loneliness, but from something else entirely, a warmth in her chest that felt dangerously like hope, spreading through her like sunrise after the longest night. 2 weeks had passed since Martha found Tahan by the creek. His wound had healed to a pink scar, and he moved now with only a slight stiffness. He should have left days ago. They both knew it. Yet each morning she found him still there, helping with small tasks around the barn, learning more English words, existing in this strange suspended moment outside of time and consequence. The late summer heat had grown oppressive, and Martha found herself lying awake again, her thin nightgown offering little relief. But tonight it wasn't just the heat keeping her restless. It was the knowledge that soon, very soon, Tahan would leave. He was strong enough now. His people would be looking for him. And she would return to her empty house and emptier dreams. The thought brought a physical pain, sharp as any wound. She pressed her hands against her stomach, feeling the hollow ache that had been her companion for so many years. The other women in town spoke of motherhood as if it were as natural as breathing, comparing their children's accomplishments, complaining good-naturedly about the trials of raising young ones. Martha had learned to smile and nod, to hide the way each word cut into her like shards of glass, unable to bear the confines of her room any longer. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped out into the night. The moon was waning now, providing just enough light to navigate to the barn. She hadn't planned to go there, but her feet seemed to move of their own accord. She found Tahan awake, sitting in the doorway of the barn, gazing out at the star-filled sky. He turned at her approach, and even in the dim light, she could see the question in his eyes. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly, knowing he understood more English now than he let on. He nodded and shifted slightly, making room for her to sit beside him. They sat in silence for a while, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them, crickets, the distant yip of coyotes, the occasional lowing of cattle. "You leave soon," Martha said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Tahan replied, his voice low. "My people, they look—" Martha nodded, her throat tight. Of course they would. He probably had a family, perhaps even a wife. The thought sent an unexpected spike of jealousy through her. "You have woman?" she asked, immediately regretting the question but unable to take it back. Tahan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Had woman, dead now, soldiers." The simple words carried a weight of grief that Martha recognized. Loss was a universal language. "Children?" she whispered. He shook his head. "No time. War came too soon." They sat in shared silence. Two people marked by different kinds of barrenness. Martha felt tears sliding down her cheeks and didn't try to stop them. Here, in the darkness with this man who had become so unexpectedly dear to her, she could finally let the grief show. "I wanted children," she said, the words tumbling out. "Wanted them so much it feels like dying sometimes. Every month, hope, every month, blood and disappointment. My husband. He left because I couldn't give him sons. And now I'm just the barren woman, the abandoned wife. That's all I'll ever be." She pressed her hands against her stomach again, that familiar gesture of emptiness. The other women, they don't say it, but I see it in their eyes. Pity, relief that they're not me. They hold their babies a little tighter when I pass, as if barrenness might be catching. Tahan moved then, turning to face her fully. In the moonlight, his eyes were intensely dark, filled with something she couldn't read. "You are not nothing," he said, his English careful but firm. "You are." He paused, searching for words. "You are sunrise after long night. You are water in dry land. You saved Tahan when could let die. You are not nothing." Martha's breath caught. The way he looked at her, not with pity or calculation, but with genuine regard. When was the last time anyone had looked at her like that? "But I can't have children," she whispered. "What kind of woman can't have children? Woman who saves enemy. Woman who is kind when world is cruel. Woman who—" He stopped, frustrated by the limits of his English. The night seemed to hold its breath. Martha found herself leaning forward, drawn by something stronger than propriety or sense. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure he must hear it. "Tahan," she breathed. And then, in a rush of desperate courage born of years of emptiness and weeks of unexpected connection, she spoke the words that would change everything. "Take my cattle. Only give me a child." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their boldness. Martha immediately wanted to take them back, to flee to her house and pretend this moment had never happened. What was she thinking? What kind of desperate, shameful woman propositioned a man like this? But Tahan didn't recoil in disgust. Instead, he reached out slowly, carefully, and placed his hand on her shoulder. The warmth of his touch through the thin fabric of her nightgown made her shiver. "You think Tahan take payment?" he asked quietly. "Like trade blankets for horses?" Martha's face burned with shame. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean, I just thought—" "Shh." His hand moved from her shoulder to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Martha not understand. If Tahan give child, not for cattle, not for payment." She looked up at him, hope and confusion warring in her chest. "Then why?" He was quiet for a moment, his hand still gentle against her cheek. "Because Martha see Tahan as man, not as Apache dog. Because Martha's eyes hold same loneliness as Tahan's heart. Because perhaps Great Spirit bring us together not for saving Tahan's body, but for saving both our spirits. Martha felt something crack open inside her chest. Years of rigid control and buried hope spilling out. But your people, my people, they would never accept. Tonight, no Apache, no white woman, only Tahan and Martha. Only two people who understand empty arms and empty hearts. He moved his hand to rest over her heart, and she could feel its steady beat against his palm. If Martha want child, Tahan give, but not for trade, for... He struggled again with the language, then simply said, for this, and gestured to the space between them, the connection that had grown despite every reason it shouldn't exist. Martha felt dizzy with the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just about her desperate desire for a child anymore. This was about the way he looked at her, the way she felt when she was with him, alive, seen, valued, not as a failed wife or a barren woman, but as herself. Are you sure? She whispered. Instead of answering with words, Tahan leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, an intimate gesture that somehow felt more profound than a kiss. They breathed together in the darkness, two wounded souls recognizing something essential in each other. Come, he said finally, taking her hand and leading her deeper into the barn, to the bed of hay where he'd been sleeping. Martha knew she stood at a threshold. Cross it, and there would be no going back. She would be more than just an abandoned woman. She would be a woman who had taken an Apache warrior to her bed. If anyone found out, the consequences would be severe. But as she looked at Tahan, at the gentleness in his warrior's hands and the understanding in his dark eyes, she realized she'd already crossed that threshold the night she saved him. Everything since had been leading to this moment. Yes, she whispered, and let him draw her down into the sweet-smelling hay, into a choice that was reckless and dangerous and absolutely right. Outside, the prairie wind sang its ancient song, and the stars wheeled overhead, bearing witness to two people choosing each other against all odds, creating their own small universe of belonging in a world that would condemn them both. The barn had become their sanctuary. In the pale light of the old lantern, turned low to avoid detection, Martha and Tahan created a world apart from the hatred and divisions that ruled the daylight hours. Here, in the sweet-smelling hay with the gentle sounds of cattle nearby. They were neither Apache nor white. They were simply two souls who had found unexpected solace in each other. That first night had been awkward and tender by turns. Tahan's hands, so capable of violence, had trembled as they touched her. Martha, who had known only Thomas's perfunctory attentions, discovered gentleness she hadn't known existed. They came together not with the desperate passion of youth, but with the careful reverence of those who understood how rare and precious such connection was. You are beautiful, Tahan had whispered in his improved English, tracing the lines that years of sun and sorrow had etched on her face, like hawk, strong, proud. Martha had laughed softly, sadly. I'm old, 32 and barren. Not old, seasoned, like good leather, and not barren, empty arms not same as empty heart. In the days that followed, they fell into a pattern that should have been impossible but somehow worked. During daylight, Martha went about her chores, checking cattle, mending fences, maintaining the fiction of normalcy. But her step was lighter, her face less drawn. Even Bessie seemed to notice the change, lowing at her with what seemed like bovine approval. Tahan had fashioned himself better shelter in a hidden corner of the barn, behind stacked hay bales where no casual visitor would think to look. He'd become adept at disappearing whenever Martha signaled danger. A specific whistle meant riders approaching. 2 short calls meant all clear. In the evenings, after the sun set and the risk of discovery diminished, they came together. Sometimes they simply sat and talked, Tahan's English improving daily as Martha taught him new words. She learned some Apache phrases too, though her tongue stumbled over the unfamiliar sounds. What does that mean? She asked one night after he'd murmured something in his language against her hair. Cannot say in English. He replied, no words. Is like, when eagle sees whole world from sky. That feeling, but for person. Martha understood. There were no English words for what she felt either. This sense of being truly seen, of mattering to someone not for what she could provide, but for who she was. They talked of their pasts carefully, sharing pain in small doses. Tahan told her of his young wife, killed in an army raid while he was away hunting. How he'd returned to find their wickiup burned, her body left for the vultures. Could not even bury proper, he said, his voice tight with old grief. Soldiers watch, wait for Apache to come back, so I leave her for sky burial, like old ways, but heart breaks for not doing right. Martha held him then, understanding the weight of that failure, even though it wasn't truly a failure at all. She told him of her miscarriages, of the last one that had nearly killed her. The doctors said I was built wrong inside, she admitted one night, her head on his shoulder. Said I should be grateful I survived. Stop trying for babies. Thomas, he looked at me like I was broken after that, like a cow that couldn't calve. Thomas was fool, Tahan said simply. Man who cannot see treasure because looking for gold. But it wasn't all grief they shared. Tahan had a dry humor that surprised her, and Martha found herself laughing more than she had in years. He told her stories of his childhood, of learning to track and hunt, of the pranks young Apache boys played on their elders. She shared memories of her girlhood back east, of dreaming about the frontier before she understood how hard it would be. One evening, a thunderstorm rolled across the prairie, turning the air electric. They sat in the barn doorway, watching lightning illuminate the grassland in stark, beautiful flashes. My people say thunder is giant bird flapping wings, Tahan told her. Lightning is arrows from sky warriors. My people say it's just electricity in the clouds. Martha replied, but I like your version better. He smiled at her, that rare, transformative expression that made him look years younger. Your people explain everything. My people feel everything. Maybe both needed. It was moments like these that made Martha forget the impossibility of their situation. But reality had a way of intruding. One afternoon, Jim Morrison rode up unexpectedly while Tahan was helping her repair a section of fence far from the barn. Martha's whistle sent him diving into the tall grass. But her heart didn't stop racing until Morrison finally left, having spent an uncomfortable hour trying to convince her again to sell. Getting dangerous out here for a woman alone, Morrison had said, his piggy eyes scanning her property. Heard tell there's been Apache raiders about. You sure you're safe out here, Martha? I have my rifle, Mr. Morrison, and my cattle dog. The dog in question, a mongrel she'd rescued years ago, wagged his tail lazily from the porch. Dog ain't much protection against Apache. They're savages. Martha, kill a woman as soon as look at her. Worse than killing, if you catch my meaning. Martha had gripped her rifle tighter, fighting the urge to defend the man hiding in her grass. I appreciate your concern, but I'm quite safe. After Morrison left, Tahan emerged, grass seeds in his hair. The close call had shaken them both. Too dangerous, he said that night. I should go. No. Martha surprised herself with the vehemence of her response. Not yet, please. They both knew he was right. Every day increased the risk. But something had shifted between them, deepened beyond the initial bargain Martha had proposed. This wasn't just about her desperate desire for a child anymore. When Tahan touched her now, she felt whole in a way she never had before. When he looked at her, she saw herself reflected not as the abandoned wife or the barren woman, but as someone worthy of desire, of love. Yes, love. The word she didn't dare speak aloud but felt with every fiber of her being. It was madness to love an Apache warrior. It went against everything she'd been taught, everything society demanded. But lying in his arms in their barn sanctuary, listening to his heartbeat strong and steady against her ear, Martha knew that what they had was worth any risk. Stay, she whispered against his chest. Just a little longer. His arms tightened around her. Little longer, he agreed, though they both knew that time was a luxury they couldn't afford. Outside their sanctuary, the world waited with its rules and hatreds and divisions. But inside, wrapped in hay-scented darkness and each other's arms, Martha and Tahan carved out their own small territory of belonging, fragile as a soap bubble, precious as water in the desert, and doomed by the very forces that had brought them together. The cattle lowed softly in their stalls, bearing witness to a love that shouldn't exist but did, burning all the brighter for its impossibility. And somewhere in the vast Texas night, a screech owl called, once, twice, 3 times, like a prophet of changes yet to come. The morning sickness came with the first frost of autumn. Martha knelt behind the chicken coop, retching into the dusty ground while the hens clucked disapprovingly around her. When the spasm passed, she sat back on her heels, one trembling hand pressed to her stomach, hardly daring to hope. She'd been late before. Stress and poor nutrition could do that to a woman. But this felt different. Her breasts were tender, swollen. Foods she'd eaten all her life suddenly turned her stomach. And there was something else, something harder to define. A fullness, a sense of change deep within her body. Martha waited another week to be sure, then another. When the second month passed without her monthly blood, she knew. The miracle she'd prayed for, wept for, nearly died for, was finally happening. She was carrying Tahan's child. The joy that flooded through her was immediately followed by terror. A child, but not just any child. A half-Apache child, conceived outside the bonds of marriage with a man her society considered a savage enemy. The women in town who pitied her now would turn vicious. The men who merely dismissed her as the abandoned wife would see her as something far worse. That evening, she could barely contain herself as she made her way to the barn. Tahan was repairing a bridle, his fingers working the leather with practiced skill. He looked up at her approach, and his face immediately creased with concern. "Martha, you sick? Look pale like winter moon." She knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. They were warm, calloused, familiar. "Tahan, The words caught in her throat. How did one share such news? Such joy and terror mixed? What wrong? His English had improved remarkably, but worry made him revert to simpler constructions. "Nothing's wrong." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Everything's right. Tahan, we're going to have a child." He went absolutely still, his dark eyes searching her face. "Child?" he repeated, as if the word were foreign. "Yes." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Your child. Our child." The transformation of his face was something Martha would remember for the rest of her life. Wonder, joy, and fear chased each other across his features before settling into something fierce and protective. "You sure?" "I'm sure. 2 months now without my woman's time, and I feel different. I know my body, and there's a child growing inside me." Tahan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. He murmured in Apache, words she didn't understand but whose meaning was clear. When he finally pulled back, there were tears on his cheeks, the first she'd ever seen from him. "I think spirits finally show mercy," he said softly. "Give us both what heart wants most." But then reality crashed back. Tahan's face grew serious, his warrior's mind already calculating dangers. "This change everything," he said. "Cannot hide child, cannot hide Apache blood in child's face." Martha nodded. She'd thought of nothing else for days. "I know, but Tahan, I don't care. Let them gossip, let them judge. I'll have my child, our child. That's all that matters. Not just gossip. Martha, danger, real danger. Some men kill Apache baby, kill mother of Apache baby." The starkness of his words chilled her, but Martha's hand went protectively to her stomach. "Then we'll face it together." "No." Tahan stood abruptly, pacing the small space. "I bring danger to you. Must leave. Must. Don't you dare." Martha stood too, anger flashing through her. "Don't you dare leave me now. This child needs a father." "Dead father, no good to child. Martha, please, think. If I stay, if people find out, then we'll be careful. More careful than before. You can stay hidden, and when I start showing, I'll I'll say the father was a traveling man, someone passing through. Tahan shook his head. When baby come, they see Apache blood strong, shows in face, in hair, in skin. Then I'll leave. When the time comes, I'll go somewhere else. Somewhere people don't know me. Leave land, leave cattle? Martha, this your home. No, she said firmly. This was my prison. You made it home. You and this child. They argued long into the night, Tahan insisting he should leave for her safety, Martha refusing to let him go. Finally, exhausted and emotional, they reached a compromise. He would stay through the winter, through the pregnancy. They would be extra careful, and Martha would start planning for what came after. As the weeks passed and Martha's condition became harder to hide, she ventured into town less and less. When she did go, she wore her loosest dresses and kept her shawl wrapped tight. The general store owner's wife, Mrs. Hutchinson, gave her sharp looks but said nothing. Martha bought supplies for preserving food, telling anyone who asked that she was preparing for a hard winter. Tahan became even more vigilant, rarely leaving the barn during daylight. He'd constructed a hiding place beneath the floorboards, just large enough for a man to lie flat. Martha hated the thought of him down there, but they'd agreed it was necessary. The baby quickened on a cold November night. Martha gasped at the first flutter, like butterfly wings inside her. Tahan placed his hand on her growing belly, his face intent. Feel that? Martha asked. He waited, patient as when tracking game. Then his eyes widened as the baby moved again. Stronger this time. Our child lives. He whispered. Strong already. Fighter, like mother. Like father. Martha corrected. They were lying in their nest of blankets in the barn. The lantern turned low. Outside, the first winter storm was building, wind rattling the walls. But inside, they were warm, safe, complete. Have you thought of names? Martha asked. Apache way. Wait to see child first. Name must fit spirit. My way too, sort of. Though I always liked the name Catherine for a girl, after my grandmother. Catherine. Tahan tested the name. Sound like wind in cottonwood trees. Pretty. And for a boy. They were quiet for a moment. Both knew a boy would face even greater challenges. Expected to be strong, to fight, to prove himself in a world that would see him as neither white nor Apache, but something in between. John, Tahan said finally. Good strong name. Can walk in both worlds. John, Martha smiled. Yes, though I think John Tahan, so he knows both parts of who he is. Tahan's hand tightened on her belly. Brave woman to give child Apache name. Brave man to give me a child at all. They held each other close as the storm built outside. In a few months, everything would change. The secret they'd guarded so carefully would be impossible to hide. The child growing inside Martha would emerge into a world unprepared for his or her existence. But for now, in their sanctuary of hay and shadows, they had this, the three of them together, a family formed against all odds. The baby turned again, as if dancing to some unheard music, and Martha felt her heart expand to make room for a love fiercer than any she'd known. Whatever came next, whatever price they paid for this forbidden joy, it would be worth it. She'd whispered for a child in desperation. What she'd received was so much more. Love, purpose, and a future written in defiance of every rule that said it couldn't be. The storm howled louder, but Martha felt no fear. She had Tahan's arms around her, their child growing beneath her heart, and the wild, impossible hope that somehow they might find a way to weather whatever came next. The pounding on the barn door came just after midnight, violent enough to shake the entire structure. Martha jerked awake in Tahan's arms, her heart hammering. They'd grown too comfortable, too careless. She was 7 months along now, her belly round and obvious despite the loose clothing she wore. Martha Caldwell! The voice was Ethan Hartley's, sharp with authority and ugly with triumph. We know you're in there, and we know what you're hiding. Tahan was already moving, reaching for his knife, but Martha caught his arm. Through the cracks in the barn walls, she could see torchlight, many torches. Too many. How many? She whispered. Tahan peered through a knothole. 15, maybe 20. Have guns. Come out now, woman, or we'll burn you out, Ethan shouted. You and your Apache dog both. Martha's mind raced. The hiding place under the floorboards. But there wasn't time, and they'd tear the barn apart looking for him anyway. Her rifle was in the house. All they had was Tahan's knife and the old pistol she kept in the barn. Maybe 4 bullets left. Martha, Tahan said urgently. You go out. Say I force you. Say I... No. She stood, pulling her shawl around her shoulders, trying to hide her swollen belly. We face this together. They kill us both. Kill baby. Then we die as a family. She touched his face, memorizing it in what might be their last moment. I won't let you face them alone. The pounding came again. Last chance. Martha. She walked to the door. Tahan beside her. I'm coming out, she called. Don't shoot. Martha lifted the bar and pushed open the door. The torchlight was blinding after the darkness of the barn. As her eyes adjusted, she saw them. Morrison, Hartley, the Baxter brothers, men from town and neighboring ranches, all armed, all wearing expressions of righteous fury. And there, at Ethan's side, stood Mrs. Hutchinson from the general store, her face twisted with vindictive satisfaction. I knew it, the woman said. Knew something wasn't right. Buying all those supplies, getting thick around the middle. Then I remembered seeing that Apache horse thief's tracks leading this direction months back. There's no one here but me, Martha said, stepping forward to block the doorway. Ethan laughed, an ugly sound. Nice try, Mrs. Hutchinson saw him through your window 2 nights ago when she came to check on you. Being neighborly, she said. He spat tobacco juice. Neighborly enough to discover you're betting a savage. Whoring with the enemy. Someone shouted from the crowd. Traitor! Should have sold when I offered. Morrison added. Now we'll take the land anyway, after we clean up this mess. Tahan stepped out of the barn then, moving to stand beside Martha. His face was calm, resigned. The crowd surged forward with angry shouts, but Ethan held up a hand. Well, the Apache shows himself. Ethan's eyes glittered in the torchlight. You know what we do to your kind around here, boy? I know, Tahan said simply. And you, Martha? Ethan's gaze dropped to her belly, now visible despite the shawl. Carrying his mongrel brat, your husband should have drowned you like the bitch you are instead of just leaving. Martha felt Tahan tense beside her, but she stepped forward, her chin raised. You want him? You'll have to go through me first. Martha, no, Tahan began. That can be arranged. Someone called out, Apache-loving whore! Enough. A new voice cut through the mob's anger. Sheriff Williams pushed through the crowd, his badge glinting in the torchlight. For a moment, Martha felt hope. Sheriff, thank God, she began. Save it. Martha. His weathered face was grim. I've got to take him in. You know that. Apache raiders hit the Donaldson place last week. Killed 2 men. Folk want justice. That wasn't Tahan. He's been... She stopped, realizing she couldn't explain how she knew without condemning herself further. Been here? The sheriff's eyes were knowing. I figured as much. Martha, I'm trying to save your life here. Let me take him peaceful-like. And maybe folks will let you be. Let her be, Ethan snarled. She's carrying Apache spawn. She's a traitor to her own race. The crowd murmured agreement, growing uglier. Martha saw hands moving to guns, ropes. Please, she said to the sheriff. He's done nothing wrong. He's not a raider. He's Apache, the sheriff said flatly. That's enough for these folks. And truth be told, Martha, it's enough for the law, too. Now step aside. No. Tahan touched her shoulder. Martha, must think of baby now. She turned to him, tears streaming down her face. I won't let them take you. If you don't, he said softly in her ear. They kill us all. This way. Baby lives. You live. Move aside, Martha, the sheriff said. Or I'll have to move you. The crowd pressed closer, their faces demonic in the dancing torchlight. Martha saw ropes already being prepared, saw the bloodlust in their eyes. They'd come for a hanging, and they wouldn't leave without one. "Promise me," Taihan said urgently. "Promise you protect our child. Tell child about father, about both peoples. Promise." "I promise," she sobbed. He kissed her then, there, in front of everyone. A gentle press of lips that held all the words they'd never have time to say. The crowd roared in outrage. "Get your hands off her, savage!" Tahan stepped away from Martha, raising his hands. "I go with Sheriff. No fight." "Like hell," Ethan said. "We do this here and now. Justice, frontier style." "Now hold on," the sheriff began, but the mob was already surging forward. Martha threw herself in front of Tahan, her arms spread wide. "No, you want to hang him. You hang me too. I loved him. I carry his child proudly. If that makes me a traitor, then kill us both." Her words shocked them into momentary stillness. In that pause, she felt the baby move within her, strong and insistent, as if protesting the violence surrounding its parents. "Martha," the sheriff said quietly, "don't do this. Think of your child." "I am thinking of my child," she said fiercely. "What do I tell this baby? That I stood by while a mob murdered its father? That I was too cowardly to stand for what's right? You tell it that its mother survived." Tahan said. He gently moved her aside, his strength still greater than hers despite her desperate resistance. "You tell it about Apache honor, about courage." He looked at the mob, his head high. "I am Tahan, of the Chiricahua. I am warrior. I do not fear death." The Baxter brothers had already thrown a rope over a barn beam. The noose dangled there, waiting. "No trial?" Martha begged the sheriff. "No justice. This is justice." Someone shouted, "For every white man killed by Apaches." They seized Tahan then, binding his hands. He didn't fight, didn't struggle. His eyes found Martha's one last time. "Our child will carry my blood," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "Protect them. Let them know Apache and white both have honor. Both can love. We prove this." The mob dragged him to the noose. Martha tried to follow, but the sheriff caught her, holding her back with surprising gentleness, even as she fought him. "Don't watch," he said quietly. "For the baby's sake, don't watch." But she did watch. Watched as they put the rope around Tahan's neck. Watched as Ethan Hartley, grinning with satisfaction, kicked the barrel out from under him. Watched as the man she loved, the father of her child, died with dignity and courage, his eyes finding hers until the very end. The crowd cheered. Some fired guns into the air in celebration. Martha fell to her knees in the sheriff's grip, a sound torn from her throat that was barely human. The baby turned violently within her, as if sensing the loss. "It's done," the sheriff said to the crowd. "Now get off this property, all of you." "What about her?" Ethan demanded. "Apache lover needs to pay too." "She's paid," the sheriff said firmly. "Look at her. She's paid. Now get, before I arrest the lot of you." Gradually, grumbling, the mob dispersed. The sheriff waited until the last torch had disappeared into the darkness before releasing Martha. She crawled to where Tahan's body hung, reaching up to touch his still warm hand. "I'll need to take the body," the sheriff said quietly. "Unless, do you know his people's burial customs?" Martha could barely speak through her tears. "Sky burial. He told me once, leave the body where the eagles can—" She couldn't finish. The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. "There's a high mesa, 10 miles north. Eagles nest there. I could take him there. Unofficial like—" She looked up at him through her tears, seeing unexpected compassion in his weathered face. "He wasn't a bad sort," the sheriff said gruffly. "I could see that. But Martha, you need to leave. Soon as you're able. This won't be the end of it. Ethan Hartley won't rest until he has your land. And now he's got all the excuse he needs." The sheriff cut Tahan's body down, handling it with more care than Martha had expected. As he prepared to leave, he paused. For what it's worth, he said. "You've got courage. Both of you did. That child will have strong blood from both sides." Then he was gone, taking Tahan with him, leaving Martha alone in the barn where they'd loved, where they'd dreamed of a future that would never be. She pressed both hands to her belly, feeling the child, their child, moving within. "I'll protect you," she whispered to the baby. "I'll tell you about your father. How brave he was. How good. I promise, my love, I promise." The dawn came slowly, painting the prairie in shades of red like blood, like birth, like the promise of a new day that would come whether she was ready or not. The first pain came at dawn, sharp and sudden as a knife thrust. Martha gasped, her hand flying to her swollen belly. The baby wasn't due for another 3 weeks, but grief and shock had their own timeline. She gripped the porch railing, breathing through the contraction, alone as she'd been for the 2 months since that terrible night. When the pain passed, she made her way inside, movements careful and deliberate. She'd prepared for this, knowing she'd have no midwife, no neighbor woman to help. The ladies in town had made their position clear. She was dead to them, a race traitor carrying an abomination. Even Mrs. Hutchinson, who'd been so eager to expose her secret, crossed the street when she saw Martha coming. The second contraction hit as she was filling the water basin. This time, she cried out, unable to hold it back. The sound echoed through the empty house, emphasizing her isolation. But Martha Caldwell was no stranger to doing hard things alone. She'd sold most of the cattle to Jim Morrison for half their worth, enough to see her through until she could travel. The sheriff had been right. Ethan Hartley had already filed papers claiming her land was abandoned, that she'd forfeited her rights by consorting with the enemy. She had perhaps a month before they came to force her out. Another contraction. Stronger. Martha made it to her bedroom, the same bed where she'd lain with Thomas, where she'd wept for babies that never came. Now, irony of ironies, her baby was coming, and she was alone. The labor stretched through the morning into afternoon. Martha walked when she could, rested when she had to, fought through each wave of pain with Tahan's name on her lips. She thought of him during the worst of it, his gentle hands, his fierce protection, the way he'd faced death with such dignity. Their child would know that courage. As the sun peaked, the urge to push became overwhelming. Martha positioned herself as best she could, drawing on every bit of strength left in her body. She thought of the Apache women Tahan had told her about, giving birth far from camp sometimes, alone but not weak. She would be like them. She would be strong for their child. The final push brought a scream she couldn't suppress, and then a cry. Not hers, but tiny, fierce, announcing arrival into a world that didn't want him but would have to reckon with him anyway. A boy. Martha lifted her son with shaking hands, clearing his mouth, checking his limbs. Perfect. He was perfect. Dark hair already thick on his head, skin the color of copper and cream mixed, features that were clearly both Apache and white. Tahan's strong nose, her stubborn chin. Beautiful. "John Tahan Caldwell," she whispered, bringing him to her breast. He latched immediately, strong even in his first moments. Your father would be so proud. She cleaned them both as best she could, wrapped the baby in the soft blankets she'd prepared. As evening fell, she held him by the window, showing him the prairie that stretched endlessly under the vast Texas sky. Your father's people say the spirits live in everything, she told him softly. In the wind, the grass, the eagles that fly over the mesa. He's out there somewhere, watching over us. And my people, they say God has a plan for everyone. Maybe his plan was bringing your father and me together, just long enough to bring you into this world. The baby's dark eyes seemed to focus on her face, wise beyond his hours. In the days that followed, Martha recovered slowly, caring for John Tahan alone. He was an easy baby, crying only when hungry or wet, content to lie in her arms and study the world with those serious dark eyes. When he was a week old, she ventured to the barn for supplies and found something that made her heart stop. Carved into the wood of Tahan's hiding place, in his careful English letters, "For my child, Be strong like mountain. Be gentle like rain. Be proud of both bloods. Father loves always. He must have carved it during those long days of hiding. Insurance against an ending he'd sensed coming. Martha traced the words with trembling fingers, then carried John Tahan to see them. Your father left you words, she said. Your first gift from him. 2 weeks later, Sheriff Williams rode up to the house. Martha met him on the porch, John Tahan in her arms, rifle within reach. I'm not here officially, he said, dismounting slowly. Wanted to see how you were faring, and to tell you, Hartley's got the judge ready to sign your eviction papers. You've got maybe 2 weeks. I know, Martha said. We'll be gone before then. The sheriff studied the baby, his expression unreadable. He's a handsome boy, got his father's look about him, and his mother's spirit. Martha added firmly, that he does. The sheriff reached into his saddlebag. This is from the mesa. Thought you might want it. He handed her an eagle feather, perfect and unbroken. Martha's throat tightened. It must have fallen near where they'd left Tahan's body for the sky burial. Thank you, she managed. Where will you go? California, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere they don't know our story. Somewhere John Tahan can grow up without the weight of other people's hate. The sheriff nodded. Might be best. Though hate has a way of following. That boy, he'll face challenges wherever you go. Then I'll teach him to be strong, like his father, like the mountain. Martha, the sheriff paused, seeming to wrestle with something. What you did, standing up to that mob, not many would have that courage. That boy's lucky to have you for a mother. After he left, Martha packed what little they could carry. The christening gown she'd sewn so long ago. Now, waiting for a church that would accept her mixed-blood child. The eagle feather. Tahan's few possessions. The rest she would sell or abandon. On their last night in the house, she sat on the porch with John Tahan, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Texas sky. The same stars that had watched over her loneliness, her love, her loss, and now her fierce joy in this child who should never have been but was. See that bright one? She pointed, though the baby was too young to follow. That's the evening star. Your father and I, we used to watch it together. He said his people call it something that means the one who guides home. Maybe that's what we'll follow, west, to a new home. The baby gurgled, waving a tiny fist at the sky. Years would pass. John Tahan would grow tall and strong, bearing his mixed heritage with the dignity both parents had given him. There would be hard times, taunts from other children, suspicious looks from adults. The constant challenge of being neither fully white nor fully Apache in a world that demanded you be one or the other. But Martha would raise him with stories of his father's courage and honor. She would teach him both the Lord's Prayer and what she remembered of Tahan's words about the spirits in nature. When he asked why he looked different from other children, she would tell him he was blessed to carry the strength of two peoples. And sometimes, when the moon was full and the prairie wind sang its ancient song, she would hold him close and whisper, "You are his promise, child, proof that love can outlast chains, cruelty, and death. You are the bridge between worlds, the hope that one day all children will be judged not by their blood but by their hearts." In the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. The prairie stretched endless under the stars. And somewhere, an eagle soared on thermal currents, carrying prayers and promises to the sky. Martha rose, her son in her arms, and went inside to prepare for the journey ahead. The abandoned wife who had whispered desperate prayers into the darkness had become something else entirely. A mother, a survivor, a woman who had loved without boundaries and would teach her son to do the same. The empty arms were full now. The barren woman had borne fruit, and the future, uncertain as it was, held the promise of Tahan's words, "Be strong like mountain, be gentle like rain, be proud of both bloods." Love, Martha had learned, was its own frontier, dangerous, transformative, and worth every risk for the new life it could bring. Thank you for listening to this story of love, loss, and hope from the American frontier. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share what this story meant to you. Your stories and comments help build our community of Western history and romance lovers. Until next time, partners.